areas, the board decided not to move forward with expansions to the development area, but they did want us to move forward with identifying factors and processes about how we would do that in the future when they get needed. So we will continue to work on that type of component, but not actual expansions to the development area at this time. The Board of Supervisors was interested in the Crossroads community concept, which is sort of a concept of providing essential services to the rural area in some form. They directed us to continue with further defining what the intent and how that would be implemented and how it would be implemented in the development area. They've committed to doing it, but they've committed to us continuing to move forward in that planning process. For the rural interstate interchanges, that's primarily regarding the Shadwell interchange and the Yancey interchange, Yancey Mill interchange. The board directed us not to move forward with any further planning process during the comp plan update, but they did recommend, or they did agree with a recommendation that upon completion of the comp plan, we would move into potentially small area planning processes for those two areas, and then prioritize the Shadwell interchange as the priority interchange. That can clarify kind of what those are.
So, a little question about that. A lot of the concern that I heard from the public about this is in the previous slide, it said growth management. And when I hear the term growth management, I think about constraints on growth, or things that are trying to, or at least decide, help determine where growth should be and should not be, and mechanisms to keep growth out of places it should not be. All four of those were mostly about increasing uses, and none of them were what I would call management per se. And so I know that there's a lot of interest in maybe, should there be another toolkit, or there should be some other opportunity to actually talk about growth management. I know the current comprehensive plan that talks about some of the strategies for limiting growth, like, for example, limiting services in the rural area, for example. So, any thoughts?
Well, I think to date, we haven't focused in on any significant changes to our rural area that would encourage growth to our rural areas. But I think we've looked at is what sort of essential services and resources might be needed for the rural population out there. So I don't think that we have a concept that is fostering any change in the densities of development or the form of development, with the potential exception of that Crossroads community, which might be an opportunity to provide those essential services. We are retooling ourselves to focus in on a rural area component of the comprehensive plan based on suggestions by the Planning Commission, so that in our land use section, we will have a very specific section, not a separate chapter, that kind of details what our expectations are for the rural area. So I think that hopefully will clarify moving forward what we are not trying to do with the development area, what we want, or rural area, what we want to achieve, which is still oriented towards resource protection.
Can I add a few things to that? Actually, because we've talked about this a lot, and you and I have even had conversations. It's a great point. I hope you don't mind me jumping in, but since we've got a small group here, kind of like an open discussion. So, I mean, I guess in a way I would push back a little bit. I mean, when we say growth management, obviously we're not saying we're going to stop population growth from coming here, because we can't do that. We're not able to do that. But limiting the extent of growth within the county, I think, is what we talk about when we say growth management, right? Like, we don't want it to expand out beyond the current boundaries, like our development area. Is that what, would that be?
Well, sort of. I mean, yes, but I mean, within the growth areas, I mean, there's green spaces within the growth areas. So there's places even in growth areas where we don't want growth to go.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I think it's more about growth management is about smart growth, right?
Mm-hmm.
And all the strategies that go with smart growth and encouraging smart growth in the community. And there's just the comments that I heard from the public was suggesting that we haven't had a process yet where we can talk about how are we encouraging smart growth. And we are sort of doing it, I guess, by sort of free market. If we encourage more growth here, then maybe we're discouraging growth over here.
Mm-hmm.
but we're not explicitly saying, like, what is our strategy? Are we going to do more to support the ACE program, for example? Are we going to do more to purchase parks or acquire more green spaces? Or like, how are we going to manage where growth goes and doesn't go?
Yeah, no, I think those are great points, and we will, obviously, there will be elements of the comprehensive plan when we're talking about our environmental stewardship goals and objectives, but and that'll get into some of that, like protection of certain areas and how we go about it. But things like, I mean, like you said, activity centers are essentially smart growth. They're saying we want to focus growth in a certain area so that it doesn't spread to other areas, and we want to make sure that those are good places where people want to live. You know, they have all those elements, like some access to green space. And then also with the potential factors considered for potential expansion of the development area. I see that one really as much of a like, if it were going to ever expand, we need to make sure that all these certain things were considered. So in a way, it can also prevent expansion or prevent additional growth out into the rural area just as much as it might allow it. It would only allow it if those factors were addressed, you know, sufficiently. So I think a lot of these things are about preventing growth. It's just that, you know, when you read the title, it may sound a little bit like we're allowing more. Does that make sense? Because the factors are about like looking at environmental resources that we want protected and making sure that we don't grow in areas where those environmental resources are low.
I'm just saying it's different than having an explicit conversation about managing growth, which is that, like, you can have a conversation about, like, we're encouraging growth here, but we're not going to do these things while we're encouraging growth. But that's very different than saying, now we're going to just talk about managing growth and keeping it out of places where it shouldn't go. And that's a very different conversation. If Karen was here, then Karen would talk about her infrastructure center and, you know, that kind of planning that goes into making sure that growth goes in places that do the least damage to natural resources and so forth.
I think we'll get to that.
Yeah, and
so
in these areas.
In terms of the timing of where we are in our work, maybe I'll jump to this slide, and then we're focusing in currently at a pretty high level, looking at our goals and objectives for what we want to achieve in a higher level. So the goals are a high level of long-term direction to fulfill the vision we have for the comp plan and the community has, and the framework that I spoke to. So the objectives are specific outcomes and targets that we're looking to accomplish. And we are in the process now of developing those higher level goals and objectives for feedback from the community, individuals, groups, and the commission and the board. Phase 3 are the action steps, which I think maybe begins to address where you're waiting to see some of this information, and that's policy, infrastructure improvements, planning efforts, other activities, and statements that implement these objectives and goals. So making sure those goals cover the things that are important so that when we move into the next step, we can look at those details of how we're going to go about achieving certain things, what we want, maybe, as opposed to just what we don't want, as an example. So I think some of that is to come, and you will see that, and the community and the commission will let us know what we're missing or not doing at that point in time. So as I said, we are in the process of drafting those higher level goals and objectives for the chapters in the plan, and we have 5 sets of them out already, and that's for environmental stewardship, parks and recreation, historic, cultural, and scenic resources, housing, and economic development. We will have shortly, hopefully soon, goals and objectives for both development area land use and rural area land use and transportation planning and community facilities. So we wanted to do a quick plug of our AC 44 website, which has the questionnaires out for these items. So please go there, take a look, because that is the important stepping stone to get to the specifics that you want. We need to make sure that we have our goals and objectives established. Then we move into a little bit more of the details of how we're going to get that There will be upcoming planning commission meetings on these goals and objectives, and we'll get a check-in with the board before we move forward to phase 3. So stay posted on that AC 44 site for when those dates are too. And excuse me if I say ACC 44. Do basketball in the brain or something, and when I was in person, I couldn't stop from saying it, so I'm sure most of it was. So I think I'm at the point where I'm going to transition to Kevin, and we can jump into some of the fun stuff.
Thanks. So, yeah, as we said, these are the topics we're really here to talk about today. Our multimodal planning approach, including activity centers and modal emphasis mapping, and draft updated and consolidated land use designations. So we've already heard a lot of input about these topics that we're going to be talking about today. We did hear pretty significant support for the idea of the activity centers concepts, for encouraging more mixed use and walkable communities, and those would include like a variety of housing types, using an emphasis on the development areas being used efficiently prior to any expansion of those development areas, the need for multimodal transportation, and including quality open and recreational space that would be paired along with those higher intensity uses within the development areas. So both the Planning Commission and Board work sessions, we were given direction to really move forward with a lot of these discussions about activity centers and getting more community input. So that's really why we're here tonight. So a little bit about the multimodal planning approach. So the idea is that we want to support the growth management policy. So this idea that we are going to retain our development areas and we're going to focus our growth within those development areas. And also the framework for equitable and resilient community that David pointed out. So all those, that wheel and that framework that we're really building the whole plan around. The multimodal planning approach. So multimodal planning is used by localities all across Virginia, and it was based on guidance documents that the Virginia Department of Rail and Public Transit put together. They've also worked with VDOT to develop this. So the idea is what everybody's trying to achieve is if we can focus all of our growth in certain areas, then it's a lot easier to serve those areas with the transportation networks that we think they need. So the outcome really would be coordinating our land use and transportation plan. It'll help give additional transportation choice for the people in there and helps reduce the greenhouse gas emissions by having more people, focused in smaller areas so they don't have to travel for their daily needs as much. So it also provides additional focus and guidance so that in the future when we need to make decisions about funding transportation projects, we know where that funding should be going to support this effort. So just a quick example, this is Norfolk, Virginia. They approved this multimodal planning approach. So what you see up here, you can see the centers in Norfolk are these blue areas, and obviously I understand Norfolk's a completely different place than Albemarle County, very urban, but just as an example you can see this. So the activity centers are the areas they've identified in the dark blue that you see there, and then they have their multimodal network, the emphasis in the colors. So each color represents a different type of modal emphasis. It can be bicycle and pedestrian, transit, and we really see, we don't focus on personal vehicle transit as a modal emphasis because we recognize that's going to be everywhere on all the roads. So that's not really it. That's not really a focus of this piece. What we're trying to find out is what is the emphasis on certain roads to make sure people can connect between those activity centers and within those activity centers. So that's where we would be focusing all of our efforts to make improvements. So with activity centers, what we expect out of those is that we would have a place where there's a variety of businesses, services, and housing, and that might be either now or it could be in the future. It's something we're planning for, and where they can where community members can really address all of their needs. So shopping, meeting of their daily needs. We want them to be walkable and bikeable areas. Ideally, these areas are something you could walk across in maybe 10 minutes or so, so pretty focused, small area. And we want them to include a variety of housing types, a mix of uses, like I said, multimodal transportation network, and access to trails and parks. The types of activity centers that we're recommending in AC 44 are termed neighborhood centers, town centers, and destination centers. And interestingly, so Crozet master plan was done very recently, and we were already looking at a lot of these elements. So we're coming here and talking to you about this, but you've already seen it. It's very prevalent in what's in the current Crozet master plan, and also say the Pantops master plan, another development area. The areas where I think it's going to be a lot more of a change are like places 29 north, so everything north of the Charlottesville city area, and then some of the areas south of there. So those are the other development areas that really haven't seen this method much. So we went through multiple steps to try and identify where activity centers should be. The first one was we did an activity intensity analysis. So what we did was we mapped all the current and future people and jobs per acre. And we came up with a map that showed that. You can see sort of an example over there on the right, or on your left, sorry, on my right. And so we used that by looking at all the housing units, the number of jobs. We looked at our land use build out analysis and the development pipeline, so we know we're looking out into the future on this. Compared to the current master plan centers, there were 50 centers all across the 5 master plans in the initial one. And that sort of, it diluted the idea. It was hard to really implement that because each one, they're all different and they might not all be mixes of uses. They might be, some of them are very small. So what we're trying to do is consolidate those into certain areas, into smaller areas. So they'll continue to be refined as we talk to you all, but we have some identified locations based on that we are calling right now our activity centers. For each activity center, we have this, and this is all based on the guidance that we see in the Department around Public Transit multimodal design guides. But we have this guidance that looks at how all the elements of each one of those activity centers might look. You can see we've got the intent up here, what the core area might look like, the building types, the use, form and site design, public, civic, and open space. That's something new that wasn't really discussed in the master plan for Crozet, but we recognize that that's an important component of any activity center, so that's a new thing. And then, of course, we'll have these examples of some of the typical scale and building types that you see. Like I said, they're the neighborhood center, the town center, and destination center are the draft ones we're looking at. And as I said, these are already implemented through the Crozet master plan. We've already identified those, so you're not going to see a major change. So this is a map of those draft activity centers. They're exactly what you all have in the Crozet master plan. I have some maps that we'll be able to maybe step up and take a look on, and I'd like to hear comments on the ones we've identified, what you all see is going on there. But that was the first, this is the draft elements of those activity centers. So that's what you see right here. You've got the town center, and then 3 neighborhood centers, and those are based on the size we expected it build out. And I think you all know those areas pretty well. So then we also wanted to look. Was there a question? Oh, I thought I had some. So this was the base layer, and you can see This is, I think I didn't highlight the step 2 was that foreman scale. I didn't mention that, but that was the identifying the foreman scale of each of the activity centers was step 2. Step 3 is identifying the existing conditions and future recommended projects. So this is the future bike and ped network from the current Crozet master plan. And so we looked at the existing conditions data, what's on the ground, what are we recommending for the future, and put all that together to come up with what we're terming the multimodal corridors. There's essentially, at the highest level, 2 types of multimodal corridors. There's the through corridors, which, you know, we say higher speed, but it doesn't necessarily have to be higher speed. There are roads that we expect to carry more people and traffic from one activity center to another, or from one development area to another. And then there's this idea of placemaking corridors, and those are the ones that really integrate into the activity centers. So those roads we expect to be slower speed. We want them to be highly multimodal, so be able to walk and bike and feel safe and comfortable doing that in those placemaking corridors. So the next step for this is really to identify the modal emphasis for all of those. And I mentioned that in Norfolk, where they identified if something should be primarily a pedestrian network, primarily a bike network, or primarily a transit network. And you can actually, I say primarily, but they can overlap. So you can have one road that may have be a modal emphasis of all 3 of those. You might have a lot of transit, walking, and biking on it. So we went through and we have started looking at what each of these things would look like. They're identified, the modal emphasis networks are identified from local and regional plans, and they prioritize certain standards for each mode. And then as the DRPT multimodal guidelines note, that these take place over time. So as we build our network, we try and achieve this modal emphasis for each area. And so then that's how we got to this step 4, the draft modal emphasis maps. So in this one, the red is the transit modal emphasis, the green is the bike modal emphasis, and the blue is the pedestrian modal emphasis. And realistically, we want to see a pedestrian network on every road. So we just went ahead and said everything should be a pedestrian modal emphasis. We want to work to get sidewalks on every road in the development areas. And you can see how the idea is to connect with these major modal emphases between each of the activity centers, and then continue them on to connect to activity centers in the urban development area as well. So I'm happy to take questions. What I'd like to do is have a conversation and see if you all can give us pointers. We did bring maps if we wanted to step up and take a look at that, or we could just take notes and you guys can kind of give me ideas and think about some of these questions. Do you have a preference? You want to stand up, or?
I think we have a small improvement. Maybe if you just go back to the previous picture and we can just sort of talk about that.
Yeah, sure. So some of the questions, I'll just highlight these and then I'll get to this. So some of the things we want you to consider are, what are your preferred transportation modes for getting around Crozet? Are there major bike or transit modal emphases that are missing from what we've got? And what destinations within Crozet or outside of Crozet do we want to be able to walk, bike, or take transit to? So I'll go back to the other map, and you can just kind of open it up, and I'm going to grab your notebooks so that I can write some of your comments down. And did we want to have questions first?
You can go first.
Well, I just have a real quick question. So is this map, where is that available on, is that available on the website?
Yes. Let's see. I will make this available. I'm not sure if it's on our website yet, but we're getting ready to release these to the public. So we're kind of coming to you all first. I don't think, this is not on our website yet, but it will be going up there. So So,
We can take a picture of these.
Yeah, that's it.
yeah, you're welcome to, it will,
We're
like I
gonna
said.
upload the slideshow onto the Crozet
Let's be-
CAC page, and then, there'll be a whole, like, web page, about this stuff on, I think, either the end of this month or early next month. This one and the land use designation, or I guess it's together, right? Those will all open for like additional feedback, and you'll be able to see the maps up closer at that point
And then
too.
I just have a general comment
Mhm.
on the AC 44 website. Personally, I find that website to be very, very confusing to navigate.
Okay.
So if there's any way to sort of.
That's the Engage Albemarle
Yes,
website.
What parts are you confused about?
I just kind of spin through it, and so I don't.
Yeah, there's a lot of information up there. I mean, this project been going on for
And
2
I don't-
years now.
I think it needs to, somehow, I don't know the solution to it, but it's not, I don't think, I think what you're gonna find is that people are gonna complain to you that there isn't that transparency because they don't understand, because there's just, it's just too hard to comprehend.
Okay.
So if someone could sort of
Yeah,
take a
just-
look at it and
We will take a
read.
look, yeah.
It's-
Just thinking out loud,
Yeah.
the average citizen doesn't use the words that planners use. We don't.
We don't.
We don't, so then we're trying to figure out what the hell that means, and then we just quit.
Oh, yeah, that's
There
interesting.
is a link.
But
We
there's
really
definitely a
don't.
window, and you have to realize that, you know, that we're not all planners. We're not all, this is not the language that we use on a daily basis. And you need, if you want our input, you need to kind of put it, state it in a way that we can understand. And, you know, and I almost feel like you need to go back to phase one, and you need to start over.
Right. Point well taken. We'll go back, and that's one of the questions we often ask, or we ask at almost every meeting is, are there terms that we need to define better for you all that you've heard in that? But we'll take a look at that. I think it's a really fair comment, and we will work with our community public engagement team and see if there's ways that we can maybe make it an easier to navigate website. So thanks for
Thank
that.
you, I appreciate it.
You sir, you were next.
This is probably going to sound a little bit rude, but when I hear the words coordinated land use and transportation planning, when I hear that phrase and then hear the Crozet master plan referenced, I just think that's all a bad joke. I mean, your map up there shows the Eastern Avenue connector going through, I believe. It also shows sidewalks going across, going through the Park Road area and in front of Crozet Park. Well, it's blue, which is supposed to be pedestrian. But those two things have just been basically thrown in the garbage can. Because you rank the Eastern Avenue connector somewhere between, depending on which article I read, between 60th and 75th.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure, I don't remember where the Park Road sidewalks are, but they're not anywhere close to the top. So why should we think that any of this means anything real?
Well, first of all, I'll point out that what you see here is what we're saying is a future network. So I understand that not all of the lines you see on this are out there right now. Regarding things like Eastern Avenue, it doesn't, the presentation that we gave on the transportation priorities, that was an initial draft on the process that we're trying to get feedback from the board on. And we've heard a lot of great feedback and great feedback on Eastern Avenue. So I think those are things that we can address. I will assure you, though, that the Eastern Avenue is still an extremely high priority for the county.
But
We're still
it can't
working.
be. I mean, when you laid out the purpose of the priorities, you said, and this is very legitimate, staff has limited time and limited resources.
Mhm.
So basically, if it's not a top 20 project, you really can't be focusing on it. And from my perspective, as much as I would like Eastern Avenue, because it would save everybody in my community 5 miles round trip just to go to the grocery store, and there is a climate impact to that, that's supposed to be important too. It's better to just say, we can't do it because this number is so staggeringly huge, than to continue to develop a neighborhood based on some aspirational goal that really cannot be achieved. And I think that it's just, it starts to feel a little deceptive after a certain point in time, a little disingenuous. You can't, it's a very difficult story to swallow, because actually nothing about Eastern Avenue has changed since 2010. There was always a railroad up to the north, there was always a creek to the south.
So, I mean, I think if we could try to stay on topic, which is
Yeah,
the specific,
yeah.
we're getting a little far afield, and I think I appreciate a lot of people have concerns, but Kevin's here, we're trying to talk about the positive vision for where we want to go, and I realize that all this is not going to get built today or tomorrow or next week, but this is the aspirational goal. I think the point is, are there things on this map that either, sorry, I don't mean to take the word.
No.
Are there things on this aspirational map that are wrong, or need to be changed, or need to be added? And I think that is where we can, like right now, we can have an impact. So I'll just jump in, because you said, where do we want to go that's not exactly on this map? And I see that Mint Springs is great. I see that that is up there. I know that's one that comes up a lot, is Mint Springs. The other one to add is Beaver Creek. I know that's a little bit off to the side and a little bit, not much farther away from the growth area, but I know that's one, just when I think about it, I think that's a really underutilized resource for our community. So just tack that on to the north and east.
Yeah, that's great, and we noted that we did, because we heard so much about Mint Springs in the master plan, we had that in there, but I think that you're absolutely right, we should be showing how this extends to the east as well, to connect to resources, including the urban area for transit network.
Yeah, and on that same thing, you have the National Bike Route going through here, and then there's also the 3-notch trail. So I was like, which I think will end up following part of that route, if not redirecting it. So that would be nice to have one here as well.
Other thoughts? Yes. Oh, sorry, Val, why don't you go ahead?
I just wonder to what extent some of our goals are achievable, and certainly when you ask the public, would you like a trail? I've never heard anybody say, no, we don't want a trail. But most of the trails of this nature that I've had experience with have been infrastructure already built, like the C&O towpath or the WNOD trail in Northern Virginia. Infrastructure that was there, no longer useful for its original purpose, and it became an absolutely wonderful resource. When I drive some of these routes, engineers tell me, yes, we can do it, but at what cost? Are you going to move the utilities? Is the Buckingham branch really going to allow you to build when their right-of-way comes right up to the road? Is the EPA going to let you disturb the land on that toxic site known as Wilson Jones? And at some point, reality has to kind of filter in, because if you tell me would I like it, of course I'd like it. But unless you can come up with a magic wand and make it so, I would love the trail, but honestly, unless Buckingham Branch decides they don't need to haul coal anymore, I just don't see realistically where it goes.
So that brings up an interesting conversation that I had today with someone. In IT, how we decide our priorities is we make a grid, right? On one axis, it has return on investment. On the other axis, it has difficulty/risk.
Right.
And so you use this term of priorities because things that are both risky or expensive and with a low return on investment, you just don't do those things.
Right.
Things that are easy to do with a high return on investment, that's your number one priority.
Absolutely.
And so I kind of feel like the process here should be kind of like that, putting together the priorities and figuring like, well, what are our easy to do things at the lowest cost? And then going forward, backwards till we get to those things that maybe we don't actually want to do them.
Yeah, I mean, I drove actually,
I think that those are great points,
Yeah.
and I think those are things that we'll have to look at as we move down the road. Like, let's get this map together first, and then see where we go. Yeah, Val?
I was just gonna suggest, just like with Mid Springs and Beaver Creek, to consider Jarman's Gap to the west towards Childs and out in that area, because that's such a highly
Oh, yeah.
used community resource, both for obviously a lot of Crozet residents, but also people from the greater Charlottesville area, out of town. There's just, it's a wonderful community resource, but it's, doesn't have great access except for by car.
Oh, and it's an access way to the park as well, to the.
Yeah. Thank you.
Hey, actually, I think you're mentioning how the treacherous kind of stretch of road. And actually, thinking back to like the Newport example, when you think about like car-centric areas, that actually might be one that you say, actually, maybe that needs to be a little more car-centric, like that area, right? I mean, it's a rural road, but like maybe that needs to be thought of more intensely as a car-centric, especially as more people are going to hear from Charlottesville using that. What was there, what were the other questions on that?
Yeah, so the questions were, what are your preferred transportation modes for getting around within Crozet? Do any major bicycle or transit emphases seem to be missing from this map? And we've identified a couple that extend outward, and that's also kind of part of that, the last question, which is what destinations, either within Crozet or elsewhere, we want to be able to walk, bike, or take transit to?
Powell's Creek.
Well, what is it?
Powell's Creek.
Powell's Creek. That's a road or an area?
It's a creek. It runs from Kling Lane all the way down. You can see a faded out line right at it's not Hayden Lane and Jarman's Gap Road.
Oh, that's right, okay, yes, yeah, I know exactly.
And it actually
And you think
comes
that
from
would
Florida.
be a network that people would use if we had like a trail along it? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, Warren Bird and PHA did a trail system there that Ann Malik has. And the county has a copy of it somewhere.
Yeah, that would be a good thing to add to this map, is the
Because
the Crozet connecting
if
trails
you
that
go-
are already there.
Right, if you go back, you need centers where all those components, the multimodal, transit, and pedestrian or trail things intersect. That's where you kind of get, or can generate more activity. Another thing I would suggest is that you look, opposed to at places like Norfolk, look at Roaring Fork Transit Authority, which is in Pitkin County. Glenwood, you probably already know it.
Yeah.
70-mile section, works like a clock.
Mhm.
And
Yeah,
it's
the
a
bus
transit
around
authority.
there, that's great, that's great.
Right,
Transit
it's
system.
a fantastic system.
Yeah. These are great points, and anything else we want to talk about with this forward?
Expanding the map to include the new proposed transit center at 64,
Okay.
good
Yeah,
park
that's
and ride,
good.
because that's supposed to be a bike center and a bus center as well.
Yeah.
And again, those bicycle routes, somehow you need to get safely on a bicycle out to this place, because I don't know how you're going to do that now.
Great point, thanks.
And just kind of a side note, I'm not sure if you go to Carbondale or Glenwood Springs and look at their, or Aspen, Snowmass, and look at their land planning and their land use, which supports that transit system. I'm not sure we have the land use policy that supports it yet.
And that's what we're trying to get at with the activity centers,
Right.
right?
Right.
To densify certain areas and to connect them with these networks, so great point. Yeah, sure.
I know on the map from the master plan, the Crozet network, I believe there was intended to be a trail kind of cutting out the growth area on the north side from the elementary school and then parking over to 240. And
So on the backside of going out the backside of the school to towards
Yeah.
the east, and then coming back down to
yeah, I'm pretty
240?
sure that's on the master plan map, which I always thought would be a good idea to accommodate some of the families, you know, in that western, eastern side of.
For like walking to school?
Yeah,
Yeah.
the elementary school.
We'll take a couple more minutes, and this isn't the last chance you'll have to like give some of this. This is like sort of the first chance, and lets us start to hear the thoughts. This stuff will be posted online. There'll be opportunities to comment on those online. So, any other things that people want to get in? Yeah, sure.
Kevin, this is the image I'm sure you're familiar with of the 2004 Crozet Master Plan. And I find myself often referring to it, admiring it, appreciating it, and I think one of the things that it does, that this map doesn't do, is suggest more of these centers. In some cases, they're really, really small, but they're nodes of, they're just slight concentrations of something other than residential use that would seem to knit these things together. I guess my question is, of those 4 identified precincts, they obviously they're already there, right? You just circle them on a map. If they were ideally spaced apart, how far apart would they be?
How far apart would each one of these?
Because my sense is they're a little too far apart. Obviously, you can't do anything about that, but it could allow for some slight increase in density in little undeveloped pockets to make for a more walkable community.
What may help with that is that there's going to be design standards about how individual developments occur, and there is sort of an understanding that we want walkability within that development. So these, correct me if I'm wrong, Kevin, but these are really oriented to be sort of larger in scale, and they are sort of existing to be known. I think what you're talking about are those opportunities that within a big development, there'll be something within a quarter-mile walk to the green, or perhaps the church, or some type of use like that. And that type of center is kind of covered in our design concepts that are applied to individual development. So, I think the point is very well taken. I think what you might see is that coming to fruition when you look at the design standards for development that we're kind of refining right now. Some of those 50 designations that Kevin talked about consolidating were those types of things, but the jargon is just too confusing to have that many designations. So I think we're stepping back to where the true centers, and then what kind of type of development we want to see as we approve individual developments. So I'm thinking you might get a better sense for those areas that you're talking about once we implement those design guidelines. And those will be in part 3. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
I think in the interest of time, we'll keep moving along to the next section of this, talking about land use, but these were great points. And like I said, there's going to be a lot more opportunity to talk about these things as we start putting the maps together and putting them out online. Okay. Just about ready.
We had some handouts for you for this next section. I think I'll play this by ear, but the other thing that we're working on right now is updating and consolidating our land use designations within the comprehensive plan. So these designations are found in the county's comp plan and all of our development area plans. And they're applied to every property within the development area in the county. And they provide the recommendations for future land uses, the form and scale of the development, and the design principles for that development. So the terminology is sometimes jargony, but this language is hopefully making it clear what the expectations are, at least a little bit clearly. It is still somewhat jargony, but that's sort of one of the purposes for this, these tables. The land use designations are policies For recommendations for future development. And they're not ordinances. So there are two types of designations on comp plans. There's the, or properties, there are the land use recommendations, what we would want to see. And then there's the underlying zoning, which are the uses that can actually be done based on the ordinances. This is the land use designations, which is what we're trying to focus in on. You move the,
You use the arrow.
no, the notes.
Sorry, I think. I got mine. You got yours here.
So, yeah. They mentioned this slide.
Yeah, I need to make changes. So with those documents that I just handed out, there's 3 of them. One of them says residential, one of them says mixed use, and one of them is employment, industrial, and institutional. So if you didn't get one of each, let me know and I can grab one.
Immediate employment.
Sorry, I got a glitch in the notes and this presentation. I want to make sure I cover everything. So, these land use designations are important when we do legislative reviews, rezonings, or special permits. They inform both the community, the planning commission, the development community, board of supervisors, what the expectations are as they consider potential changes to the zoning of the property. Why are we doing this, or why are we consolidating? Because currently we have 24 land use designations across 5 master plans. It gets to be unwieldy and confusing as the development community, commission, board, the public try to comprehend what all these land uses are. There also are, a lot of those designations are actually very similar, but they are subtly different by the master plans, depending on when that master plan was developed, that area of the master plan. So there isn't a lot of difference between all those, but it's enough to be somewhat confusing. For example, one designation for flex uses, industrial flex uses in the Pantops area acknowledges residential as a secondary use, but there's no density for it. So we don't know how many units is expected there. So it's those type of inconsistencies that we're trying to bring consistent into the comprehensive plan. The current comprehensive plan recommends that we do this, that we set up a consistent set of land use designations across the master plans. And that 2015 plan cited the southern and western master plan because at that time it was the most recent plan. However, Crozet and Pantops, as noted earlier, were recently adopted, and they have become really the template for these land use designations. So you guys were sort of on the cutting edge again of this, and the changes that you see for the comprehensive plan land use designations pretty much reflect what's already in your master plan. There are not significant changes at all. But we feel like these changes are important to do, and they also provide for some consistency across the board. Also, certain sections of the comprehensive plan recommend that we consider doing this. The housing section of the comprehensive plan recommended reevaluating the land use designations in order to potentially make affordable housing more achievable. That sort of analysis is a lot easier done if we have some consistent amount of designations instead of 24 different ones to try to calculate and adjust. We also do our build-out analysis, which is pretty complicated to do when you have different zoning, different density recommendations for so many districts. So there's a number of advantages for us to do this. And so what we did was, in doing this update, we did start with essentially the Crozet master plan and the Pantops master plan. We consolidated similar land use designations, or the same land use designations, but that had different standards within them. Some of them had different square footages for ideal building sizes and things like that. Many of the consolidated land use designations were for mixed use designations, which are both commercial and residential type uses. Most all of those ones that were combined were in the 29 north area, the closest 29 north. There were 6 of them in that area, and only one of them reflected what was in the Crozet. But your designations are basically staying the same. So let me go through what's on that table in terms of how it impacts Crozet and potentially the changes that you would find in the land use designations in the Crozet master plan. First, residential. There are 4 residential land use designations: neighborhood density low, neighborhood density residential, missing middle, urban density. All those are currently in the Crozet master plan. The only change to that land use designation is that in the neighborhood density low, we're recommending that the upper end of that be 1 to 3 units as opposed to 1 to 1.99. Part of the reason for that is to ensure there's this gap and sort of an inconsistency with that top end of land use designation. The neighborhood density residential starts at 3, so instead of having that missing unit. Again, keep in mind that the purpose of this is to provide for a consistent palette of land uses that is applied countywide. The intent is not necessarily to force a change here, but to provide first and foremost at this point in time a consistent palette that can be used everywhere and not specialized by master plans. Updates of master plans are the opportunity where you can provide specificity about what expectations you have for certain areas. So this gives a standard palette countywide, and the master plans allow you to tailor the specific recommendations to areas for what you want to achieve. For the mixed-use designations, again, all the designations that are in the Crozet master plan are the same. They're all here. All the ones shown here, neighborhood density, community mixed use, commercial mixed use, and downtown mixed use are all in the Crozet master plan. Urban mixed use is not, and that's the use that's more applicable for the 29 corridor. The only changes to these designations is in the community commercial mixed use, where the block length is becoming a little bit more flexible, and it's going from a maximum of 400-foot length to 500 feet. So it's a relatively minor change. The other thing just to note is the downtown district that used to be exclusively in the Crozet master plan, we are now putting in the countywide palette of land uses, so it could be applied in other master plans, other parts of the development area. It doesn't change this recommendation, it's just now applicable to other areas. Go back to say also the missing middle residential designation, which right now is only in the Crozet master plan, is now going to be applicable countywide, and probably over time will be implemented in other areas. For the industrial and employment and institutional uses, again, the only substantive change is that block spacing. It now can be 500 feet in length as opposed to just 400. It's a fairly minor change. The institutional designation, we've listed research and development. and added that as a potential primary use. That in part, we have institutional uses and lands designated for institutional use. Many of them are owned by the county. They could be economic development opportunities. You can think of the NGIC area as a potential place where those public lands might be used for research and development purposes. So that was the purpose of that change. In the public lands and green space, really the only change to these would be added a recommendation for connections to be made to nearby activity centers we just spoke of and to other neighborhoods. It just wasn't explicitly listed in that section of land use designation, and adding a reference to the biodiversity action plan, which wasn't specifically noted. So again, the changes as they would impact what you see in your master plan, the extent of it is really these changes. There's the overall.
So Dave, just saying, yeah, Crozet, like we were on the leading edge, right? We've already implemented this basically. I guess the only, just looking at the map, I guess the one that would impact, like you said, would be that change of the 1 to 3 potentially. But even looking at the map, there's not a whole lot of space in Crozet that's that. It's really on the fringes. There's just a few of that neighborhood density low. It's very few properties that are already designated that way.
We think that's probably the case. This is early on in this analysis. This is an idea that how that designation could be applied countywide. That is a potential implication to this Crozet plan. We can look into that further. We'll take your comment, pro or con. This is where we're here to hear that comment. Our focus primarily right now had been how would we apply that land use designation in your choices and making it more consistent and even. How that is ultimately, how that adjustment affects Crozet could be addressed either through comments about these land use designations or how you might update the master plan for those areas currently designated. So, but we recognize there is theoretically a potential impact there, and that is probably the most significant one.
I have a question about that a little bit, and it has to do with the ranges, particularly with respect to the neighborhood residential. 3 to 6 per acre is a pretty wide range, and from what we've seen, 3, 4, and 5 tend to be kind of meaningless because everybody has to go to 6 because that's a more profitable approach to it. So what's the point of the range, and is there a way to, I don't know, make it a little bit more specific or have sub-designations within the range or whatever, so that everybody's not always running to the maximum? And that, because you talked about the gap between 2 and 3, but what I really see is the gap between 3 and 6.
Well, I think, to be upfront, in our development areas, we want to maximize the utility of our development areas, so we generally encourage towards that high end. If there are physical constraints to properties that limit it, and there are some marketing decisions that are made to provide single-family detached housing, which does wind up being on the lower end of that density. I think your point's well taken, but stratifying down into layers, I think might become a little bit difficult to achieve. It becomes pretty speculative on how you would lay that out on those properties. And I think our goal would be, again, trying to achieve the highest end as possible, but providing the quality of development that makes sure that we get all the open space and amenities that we want in that development. We had previously only had 2 land use destinations, so the missing middle was sort of a new concept to sort of stratify out the land use designations a little bit more. I recognize your point. I think it's something we do need to think about. I understand exactly what you're talking about.
Well, I guess if there are concerns in that respect, the one thing maybe that people, in terms of providing feedback, would be to think about building type informed guidance. Right? I guess if there's feedback to that extent, to say, you know, hey, 6 is too many or whatever, but really sometimes people might have an issue with the actual form guidance and say, well, this type is okay, I don't have a problem with bungalow courts, but what I have a problem with is this, right? I mean, because I look at, for example, missing middle, right, and I think a lot of people look at that and they say, oh my God, 6 to 12 units or 18 units an acre, you know, and they immediately think, oh my God, I don't want an apartment complex there. But then you go to the guidance and says, no, multiplexes, no, but why might you go for that 18 units? Oh, for that small bungalow court, right, that has smaller units in a small area. But then when people see that, they go, oh, that's not so bad, you know, a small development. So maybe in terms of feedback, you know, if there's feedback on the primary uses of the building type and form guidance, that might be an area of feedback where you could say, is it just the sheer number, or is it the actual form guidance that you have, or the height and massing, for example? Are there comments that?
Yeah, you
Or the
didn't
fact
type,
that traffic is not dealt with.
when you didn't type height and massing, really do speak a lot to what ultimate density you have. The open space components of the plan also speak to how a developer can achieve an affordable development and still set aside the areas that we want, which are also things identified in a land use designation. But I'm sort of sensitive now to you know, how the layman perceives what's trying to be achieved with this, and I can see where that 3 to 6, without looking at a lot of pages and a lot of interpretation and understanding how the market works, it's difficult to see what's the difference between 3 and 6. I want to stratify it a little bit more. So, you know, we'll take a closer look at how we might better explain those in our tools.
So, another comment I have regards to industrial. There's a lot of areas within Crozet and then immediately outside of Crozet that are industrial, but they're historically been agricultural support. Yancey Mill is a great example. There's a big difference between a lumber mill and a chemical factory or something that's potentially produces toxic waste. And there's a history, you know, in Crozet of food production. We have the Monty plant and other things. We have Sarno, which is kind of pseudo-agricultural. And so I think having, you know, I think the certainty of having a different kind of industrial, which would be agricultural support industrial, I think would be a great addition to this. So, and then also, obviously, I think we also need an agricultural land use designation.
I will say one of the things that we are thinking through is, and as it relates to our rural area planning and how we do mapping and designations for uses there, that this currently is focusing on development areas. It may ultimately include some references that address what is and isn't expected in the rural areas. Right now, this table is really focused on.
But if you look at Yancey Mills, it's like right outside of Crozet. And what is this designation now? Does it have a designation, or it's just like?
Industrial.
Zone.
Well, the Yancey Mill as a village, I think some of it has a village residential designation, but it's all rural area. That boundary is really based on the stream that drains Lake and Old Creek, but Yancey Mill is rural, although it does have some urban zoning.
Do you have other?
I think we're to the next step in the process, and that's.
Sorry, Bruce, did you have a?
I was just saying what Mark was saying, the industrial situation, you know, we have a lot of land out here that's already been destroyed. It's really sad. And last thing we wanted is to invite that into this new planning stages. So industrial is too vague, you know, it's like.
Are you saying you support his idea about
Yeah,
having
support
an
this
industrial?
idea, yeah.
I think it's an interesting idea. Just thinking about those operations, Yancey's a great example, that I think people want to support and allow that business to continue, but they don't want a chemical plant there or other things. But yet, so how do you do that? Rural area designation, it really limits their ability to expand and invest in their business, but as some sort of quasi-ag industrial ag business or something.
Anson Mills,
Yeah,
Say
there's
again?
been-
Anson Mills, that golden rice, all over the whole southeast. Fellas developing, this is the kind of thing, that- it's a new regionalism.
Yeah.
It's based on agriculture or local renewable resources versus importing
A
military,
lot of places do
whatever.
hydroponic growing now, that might be a similar,
Yeah, urban gardening.
Yeah,
yeah.
that's right. I mean, food processing, right, there may end up being uses within the growth area where people could be doing, I mean, I'm looking ahead, I mean, marijuana's on the horizon, right? I mean, it's not that far away, but, like, there are potential, like, agricultural uses that might not be restricted to an open field somewhere, whether, indoor or something. So, yeah, maybe it's not a crazy idea, or maybe it's a good idea to think about incorporating some sort of ag component in the industrial.
For Crozet, I don't believe you have any industrial land designated, I believe, but then you do have a flex. And I think what I'm hearing is those types of uses need to be identified as options within the development of these areas. Secondarily, related to the existing zoning in the Yancey Mills area in 250 West, remember that the board did indicate for the interstate interchanges that they did support after the comp plan was adopted, working on small area plans for those two interchanges, one of them being the Yancey interchange. And that small area plan could hone in on those sorts of things, what sort of uses are appropriate in that interstate area. So just, that's not in the development area, but just remember that recommendation sort of stands as maybe a work program item for us to take on after the comp plan is adopted. Shadwell interchange is the first priority.
But, we have people have to go through crazy loops.
If
for
somebody
canneries.
decided that,
So, and then, there were people that had to go through a lot of loops who just wanted to make canned food, or to dry hops, or to do other things that didn't fit cleanly in there. We're putting in agricultural support, but sort of vaguely industrial.
Yeah.
And I think that's sort of what I get at. I think, we have, as I said, we have the whole Star Hill down there that is,
I'm sorry I'm late. Was there already a talk about the definition? Because there certainly is a different interpretation of industrial today than there was 20 years ago. And that may be already taken care of, but that way we don't have to go down the chemical factory rabbit hole if it's already, because that seems to be a disclaimer that's on given right at the beginning of some discussions. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about R&D flex and
Well,
purpose and things like
I
that.
think the tables that we're looking at are helping us define what industrial is, then the flex, office R&D and flex is probably the broadest. But those sort of comments, if there are things in there that you think are missing or haven't caught up, that's what we want to hear. I think that's an excellent point. We've talked about it. That may be missing here. We need to go back and make sure those options are there.
yeah, because Crozet has a very large toxic site and you want minimal soil disturbance, I could see a solar field there. Would land use allow that? Just a wacky thought, but I know that neighbors to our north have gotten kind of tied up in knots over that.
The reason I'm hesitating is because we're working on ordinance changes for solar right now. I'm not dialed into that.
Yeah.
And I think we might be. I think mostly where those are oriented is to rural area because of the land mass that's needed. But that is a unique opportunity that might be something that's worth considering. So that's a really good point to bring up. Typically, we probably would want solar things smaller in the development area because it's robbing our capacity for development. But that's an excellent
that's a
point
site
where,
that-
yeah, that's an
Yeah,
excellent
it's
point where
I was
it's
gonna
something.
sit thinking that, right?
It's the rooftop, on top of the employment site on Acme is the way to do
Yeah.
it.
Now,
Because
those-
every rooftop we should do everywhere, instead of tearing down forest.
Rooftop is fine, or I think at commercial level stuff, that's where we're focusing on the ordinance. And so they may already be anticipating that, I honestly don't know. But that type of an exception is a really good point to think about. I appreciate that.
I think it goes past this topic, but I would like to see a whole comp plan section about brownfield redevelopment and encouraging redevelopment toxic sites.
We do have to,
Yeah.
yeah, we're ready for the.
I'm gonna just kind of close this out really quick. So Talking about quickly about the next steps. Of course, we're going to continue to share and draft the goals and objectives for each of the comp plan chapters. That's all what we're working on in phase 2 this year. And we're going to continue to refine the planning toolkits, and that's going to be happening both through the goals and objectives and then into the action steps. Some of that is going to be including development area focused activity centers, making sure those are defined well, and prioritizing the efficient use of those development plan areas. We're also, as David mentioned, we're looking at some small area plans for the interstate interchanges, prioritizing the one at Shadwell out there outside of Pantops, and then also possibly looking at Yancey Mills, and then the next phase is drafting action steps for plan implementation. And just point out some of the things we're going to be looking at through that to prioritize the development within the existing development areas and to use those efficiently, how we can encourage that, incentivize that land use within the development areas to prevent continued expansion. So looking at incentives and then also looking at the gross density versus net density, because right now we've got a slightly confusing situation where gross density is used for our zoning code, but net density in some areas is used for in the comp plan. So trying to address some of those problems and making sure that we're using our development areas efficiently. And I know we're running out of time, so I'll just close with that and point out once again, please go to the Engage Albemarle site and start sharing feedback on some of these topic areas. So thank you all.
Thanks for much, Kevin. David? Allison, really briefly, want to just give us a couple minutes on
Yeah, I can't find my notes anyway, so I'll give you guys the real brief, oh, here we go. The real brief lowdown anyway still, but we typically in the past, community advisory committees had done like a new member training. As soon as you joined, you would come to the county office building and you would do the orientation. We're now going to do a video series, the Let's Talk Albemarle Learning or Training series. I think learning is what it's been branded as now. But it'll be a collection of videos that will talk not only about CACs, but other opportunities to learn more about how local government works. So some will be kind of CAC focused. There is, the one that's up right now is the introduction to CACs. There will be one on FOIA that I'm currently working on, master plans, topics. Albemarle County 101, just like is there information about the county in general, plans in general. So the comprehensive plan, master plan, small area plans, how they relate to one another, what they are, what they mean. So those are just some of the topics. And there will be an email coming out, I think either later this week or early next week, depending on when that gets finalized, that will have a little bit more details about this. And they're going to be on YouTube, so anybody in the public can watch them, but we're going to ask CAC members when you watch it to fill out a Google form to just let us know you watched it. There will be a little bit more of an explanation, but that is kind of coming forward now. And like I said, the intro to CAC is the first one that's up, and there will be more coming. So.
We got our, any updates or announcements from our supervisor, Benish?
No.
Yeah, so at the last planning commission meeting, there was a discussion about economic development. And, we talked about, and it was very, I encourage you to go back and listen to it. There's a lot of great comments made. One of the things that we talked about was, for example, that broadening tourism and what that means. Maybe think of tourism broader than just Monticello, for example. Also thinking about a recreational economy. We don't really do a lot to market that, but then also, so there's a lot of that. And then the next planning commission meeting coming up next week we will be discussing, once again, sort of, it said housing and economic development, but I'm not.
Goals and objectives from the.
Oh, goals and objectives,
Yes.
okay, so we'll be taking that for the next.
Mhm.
Thank you. Lauren? Were there any community concerns, things from the public or from the community, more generally, some things we talked about this evening? All right, the only other last bit of committee business is just to think about our December meeting. Historically, we have typically taken that meeting off because it's getting the holiday season. This year, it's also, it's a late one. I think our meeting would be like December 13th or something. It's getting rather late towards holiday season, so people want to have a meeting. I don't think, Allison, right now, I don't think there's anything pressing, right? There's no community meeting or anything like that, so.
No applications that we need communities.
Nothing. I mean, I think, you know, traditionals, we generally don't have a meeting there. As with the holidays, I'm fine. The members are generally fine with that. I'm fine with, you know, missing that meeting unless something comes up. And obviously, it's something I think, you know, if we get an application, something we can jump in and have it. We have the space reserved, so I'll hang on to it. I won't change that. Yeah, and then we will pick up, so that sounds fine, we'll pick up in January. So we have a big meeting in January. We have, I'll let you do that as well. Studio time, you tell us what's going on in January.
Yeah, so it'll be all about the Crozet Square and Barnes Lumber project update. We will have county staff. I'm not sure if VDOT is coming or not, but to talk about the actual construction of the project, and then Frank Stoner, and then hopefully DCI will also be there too. So it'll be a fun-filled meeting all about that project.
All right. Any final announcements? Anything else? All right, with that, we'll leave you adjourned. Thank you all very much. See you in the new year.
What's that?
Unanimous.
From the CCAC meeting.